Welcome back to Why Is This a Podcast? I'm your host, Kieran Watts. Like, subscribe, wear a mask, get the vaccine, and if you're in Wales, vote on May the 6th in those elections. More on that in a bit. Before we get going, what a year this week has been. We had the death of astronaut Michael Collins. We had a tragedy in Israel with a crowd crush. And there's, of course, the ongoing pandemic that has forced us all into our homes for more than a year now. And with restrictions loosening in many parts of the world, and Wales included, obviously, still can't afford to let our guard down. So I'm not perfect. In obeying the rules. It's, still after all this time, it is an adjustment. But it is worth considering making a contribution if you can to causes supporting the most vulnerable. Maybe it's your local food bank. Maybe it's a charity on an issue you care about, such as homelessness or mental health care that you're especially passionate about. And also, it's very important that when times are hard and you disagree with the mechanisms of power, or you like them the way they are, maybe, who knows? It's important to make your voice heard. So like I said, Wales, we go to the polls May 6th. And in my neck of the woods, in Islwyn, my guest tonight is campaigning to represent us in the Welsh Assembly. He currently serves as the councillor for Blackwood South. Please welcome Rhys Mills. Councillor, thank you for being here.
Pleasure.
Lovely to see you. Before we get into the questions, I do just want to ask you, how have you been over the past year and a bit during the pandemic?
Busy, in short. It's been emotional and it's been challenging because people take a look at politicians and you're all loaded and you're all in it for yourselves and all the rest of it. But the truth of it is, everything I do as councillor is done outside of my normal day job. So I work as a planning manager in the food industry, and it's a full-time job, and so it's been hard because I think what I saw at the beginning of the pandemic, at least, was the system collapsed, and it showed, for me anyway, that it amplified problems that existed pre-COVID in society. So the best example I can give is people who you've mentioned food banks in your intro, and it's quite an interesting one because people that make all kinds of assumptions about people who go to food banks, but the truth of it is those people in a lot of cases are referred by professionals. It's not just a case where you can sort of turn up and take food and go.
Well, nurses, some in parts of the country, nurses have to.
Yeah, sure. So what I found was that that professional class of people who refer those people, for obvious reasons, disappeared. They weren't at work. They were all working from home. So people really struggled to be referred. And one of in one of the most heartbreaking cases I found, where from a former soldier and his family, with no gas, no electric, no food. Me and another councillor, when we were out and about, I literally had to think outside the box, make a phone call to a friend. When I say friend, somebody I went to school with was the former director of the Trussell Trust. And I've got him on Facebook, and I literally, rung him through Facebook Messenger. I hadn't spoken to him for 20 years, explained the situation, who do I go to, and got it sorted that way. And found support from, local people who I know run the food banks in the community to get, a lot of people sorted, and when that pandemic hit and that lockdown hit, there was almost a sort of a 3-week delay where people were kind of okay, they had resource, and then after that 3 weeks, then those in need were really hit hard, and it's something it'll live with me for a long time.
It's interesting. What I was going to say was that it's a recurring theme in a number of interviews that I've done, both for this show and outside of it, that this pandemic, as unprecedented as it is in our lifetimes, the issues that it's exposed, the fault lines, they were there from the beginning.
Yeah, spot on.
And I think that applies to many different things. It applies to sort of that the healthcare system is the most obvious example, but it's also, social inequalities, the way that we do, as you say, make assumptions about people who rely on food banks, who rely on welfare, for example. So I'm glad you made that point, because I think we're getting off on a starting point of agreement, which I think will make the interaction easier. I mean, I'm glad you just didn't say sod the poor.
Well, it's
I'm glad you said that.
I should probably be upfront, and I am a socialist, so at heart. So it's for me, it's coming from a family, a single parent family from social housing. It's a start in life that I treasure, because it gave me values that I carried forward into adult life. And it's I've been fortunate that I've been able to do some sort of local, help people out locally and nationally, and done some pretty extraordinary things that if you'd have told me I'd been involved in only 5 years ago, because I haven't been in politics long, I'd have laughed you out of a room. But here I sit as the candidate for Islay, from in a Plaid Cymru candidate, National Party.
I'll lay my cards on the table. I'm not a socialist. I'm more towards the centre. So just
I used to be a social democrat, and it amplifies inequality. Well, at least I found it to. But yeah, I'm a lefty at heart.
So I've got your campaign literature here.
Yeah. It's a good-looking lad on the front. It's always a good start.
Just on the note of COVID-19, you say I have helped over 40 local businesses access the grants during lockdown. I joined Tari and Cymru project during lockdown, raising money and delivering PPE to the front line. How did you go about accomplishing those vital?
Well, I it was a strange thing, because I became an expert in applying for grants, because that, again, assumptions made about people who own businesses is that they're is that they're all directors of multinational companies. You have this, but what we're talking about here is people who own cafes, people who own hairdressers, and those grants, they throw up lots of unforeseen circumstances. I come across one business, and they were a business, but they effectively, their business model as a hairdresser was hiring a chair in somebody else's premises, but they were two separate businesses. So but that all of those grants were based on the rateable value of the building. So if you're that person that rents that chair, you suddenly fell between the cracks. So I became an expert really in applying for grants, and I spent a lot of time well into the night on my tablet in my living, in my living room with the phone strapped to my ear, talking to business owners, just filling in the grant forms for them, because they just simply didn't know how, or didn't understand where they had to go, what they had to say, what information they needed. you know. So it was a, you know, it was a 2 week, it was a 2 week part of my life that I spent a lot of time in work, getting home, you know, booking slots for people in, and just filling in application forms for them, and then dealing with whatever came back, whether they were entitled or they deemed not entitled, or they, you know, they were actually eligible for something else. And it, you know, it cost, you know, it was a lot of time, just for me, because I didn't understand it, so I had to do a lot of research myself to try and get my head around it, because I'm not, I, you know, never run a business, so it was a steep learning curve for me. But you know, it was gratifying at the end to get a lot of them over the line.
It's great to hear. You mentioned earlier on you haven't been in politics for very long.
No.
What drew you into politics in the first place?
Probably, if I think back, it's a combination of a lot of little things. So, you know, I mentioned my childhood growing up in Treorwyn. You know, and the first memory I have is taking tins of food to the community centre during the miners' strike. And even though I didn't understand what was going on because I was very young, looking back on it now, you know, we were a poor family, you know, single parent family. And sometimes we heated our home through coal given to us by the miner who lived 2 doors down, Graham. And that, you know, and I think the sense of community and injustice probably shaped, for most part, of who I am. And for a while, you know, like everybody in the valleys at that time, you know, there was one party that was born out of worker struggle that we all voted for, and still a lot of them still do to this day. You know, the Labour Party. I fell out with the Labour Party big time during the Iraq War, so I will always maintain that, you know,
many people did.
Well, I actually went on the Million March in London. It was the first political, you know, direct action I ever took as a citizen. I was so angry with them because it was so obvious to so many of us that you know, that dossier was a lie, and you know, you know, you know, whatever you think of, you know, the regime, you know, any party that can put their leader at the dispatch box and lie, and it directly results in hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians dying. And let's not forget the black hole vacuum it caused in the Middle East, and we're still dealing with that today. You know, it's you know, they disappointed me so badly that I didn't vote for a long time. I literally went to spoil my ballot.
Well, you're obviously now in Plaid Cymru.
Yeah.
So why? I suppose I'll ask it as directly as I can, because Labour is seen by many as having this stranglehold,
yeah,
over Welsh politics, the Welsh government, and indeed the general election.
Yeah.
Why is Plaid Cymru a viable alternative?
Well, I joined Plaid Cymru in 2015, because, like I say, I haven't been in politics long. You know, it feels like I've been around for ages, but I haven't really. And I joined. You remember they had those TV debates? It was the first time they'd ever had TV debates. And I don't, you know, I'd always been interested in politics, or you know, at least I, you know, kept a north eye on it, as it were. And I put it on in the background, but I was reading a book because I was, you know, I wasn't going to vote in the general election because, you know, you know, politicians, but you know, disappointed me they had. And I remember, I think it was Ed Miliband who was the leader of Labour at the time. I think it was Farage was up there, David Cameron, I forget, Nick Clegg. It was that, you know, I agree with Nick, sort of 5 minutes that everyone decided, you know, decided that.
I think I agree with Nick was Gordon Brown.
Oh, was it? Okay. So I think this is the one, I think this might be the one before, 2050. I'm pretty sure Ed Miliband was leader of the Labour
Ed
Party.
Miliband was 2015, Brown
Yeah.
was 2010.
Yeah, there we go. So I remember, so either way, I remember sort of heading a book, sort of half listening to what was going on, and my ears pricking up every time the leader of Plaid Cymru spoke, and the leader of Plaid Cymru at the time was Leanne Wood. So as a lefty, a centre left wing, whatever, as a person born of these valleys and have the values that go with it, I thought that Leanne Wood was saying things that I thought, as a former Labour voter, that Ed Miliband should have been saying, and he wasn't. Ed Miliband was trying to be conservative light, and I thought that's what piqued my interest. It was the famous one where I think it's the famous one where she sort of slapped down Nigel Farage for being Nigel Farage, and it got a lot of headlines. But that wasn't the thing that grasped me. The thing that grasped me is, I think she said at some point during that debate, decisions about Wales should be made by people in Wales. And I thought, wow, yes, you're right. Because, up until that point, just walking the dog and speaking to people and speaking to neighbours, what struck me was the system being jammed. So I quite often come across a lot of people who are in a situation not of their making, and they then interact with levels of government to try and help them, and that help is not forthcoming. And usually, when you get right to the end of it, it turns out, it's because Westminster didn't give us enough money, or we haven't got those powers for ourselves, or it's something that isn't evolved, or it's all of those kind of answers. And you think to yourself, well, if that's the reason why we can't help people, then why don't we just change it so we can help people? And that was my journey into Plaid Cymru. And then when I started doing my due diligence, then, because Plaid Cymru had passed me by, is the truth of it, because of my upbringing. So when you start looking at the green policies, and I'd grown up with the tropes of they're only for the Welsh language, they only care about independence, if you're not a Welsh speaker, they're not for you, all of this kind of stuff. But actually, when I started looking at policy by policy of what Plaid stood for in terms of economics, the environment, all the things that health, all the things that really matter, I thought, well, actually, there's not a lot I disagree with here. And that was my sort of foot in the door in Plaid, and here I am.
I want to come back to the independence question.
Yeah.
In just a few moments. But I want to sort of touch on your backgrounds. As you mentioned, you work full time, not been in politics very long, but you have got a background as a campaigner. So I'll refer again to your leaflet.
Oh, right, okay, yeah.
Where you say you about campaigning alongside miners and miners those in the fight for their pensions, for example, work cross-party for the future of our leisure centres. When you mentioned that anecdote earlier on, where you said sometimes our family, we heated our home with coal given to us by a miner 2 doors down, I think you said.
Yeah.
That sort of leapt to my mind. So how does that background in campaigning, if you're elected to the Senedd, and indeed during your campaign now for the Senedd, how would that background influence your approach?
Well, it's different, isn't it? Because when you look at politicians now, I'm not an out-of-the-box politician, by any stretch of the imagination. I don't speak in a certain way, I don't look a certain way. I don't have that background in other parties where, you go to a certain school, you go to a certain university, you get a job as a researcher, and all of a sudden then you're in a safe seat. Or in other parties, you go through the unions, you become a union rep, you get plucked out of that. You're in a council board, then you're on the cabinet, and then you're in a safe seat for your party, right? So, or the conservative route, which is certain school, certain type of person, etc. So, I think that holds me in good stead, because the biggest problem I find with politics is that it hasn't got too many normal people who've lived a life in it, a normal life, who've struggled to pay bills, who've been between jobs. People will tell you, I've really struggled for this, and I've really struggled for that. And I think, well, have you? Because your background seems to suggest to me that you're similar to to the type of person I expect to be standing for that party. So, I think being able to be an outsider who isn't sort of immersed in politics will hold me in good stead, because you think differently. I really hope that I don't get sucked into groupthink, because groupthink usually delivers bad decisions. We've seen it with leisure provision, LDP, all kinds of things. We see it going on now down in Cumvelin. So
there needs to be I do agree with you there. I think there needs to be sort of a heterogeneity in the political sphere. You need people from all walks of life.
Yeah. If you look at the Westminster Parliament that sits now, and you sort of did a sort of questionnaire of who are these people, where are they from, they probably be similar people. If you did it for the Senedd the last term, you probably get a sort of 70%, all similar backgrounds, come through similar, and that's fine. That's not a knock against any of them. Mm-hmm. But we need difference, because what you get if you get the similar amount of people from similar backgrounds in a room is that they tend to come up with solutions to things that are not based in reality. And it's a problem politics has had for a long time, really. But I guess the thing that I'm trying to get across here is, and I'm not trying to score to play a type 15-second sound bites, but the biggest problem I find in politics, it hasn't got enough people like us in it. And when it has, you see those people who come from different backgrounds tend to be the ones that make the biggest impact, because they're coming from a different perspective to everybody else.
So it's like, say for example, you introduced a multi-million proposal to tackle homelessness.
Yeah,
I suppose it's kind of the difference between somebody who's seen that firsthand, and somebody who's just seen the price tag.
Yeah, because what you look, it's like the COVID numbers that are going on at the minute. You see some horrible comments being made because the numbers are low. Well, why can't we do this? The numbers are low. Well, those numbers are not just numbers. Those numbers are people. Those are people who have passed away. Those are families that lost people. They're not just numbers. And I find it frustrating. I find it frustrating sometimes. Not unsurmountable, but I do find that I think the biggest bugbear I've got in politics is groupthink.
$1 million question now.
Yeah.
Why do you want to break up our precious union? I'm joking.
Well, it's for me. It's for anyone who knows me, I'm a perfectly practical guy. I'm not. I have no. For all the stuff that gets thrown at members of Plaid Cymru, cultural this, and it's all about this and it's all about that. For me, it's a purely practical thing. So I mentioned before, you certainly come across things that, and you see it in policy too, with the Welsh government, where we've got an issue, the solution is we bring it into our control to make better decisions, but we stop there because that's going on to nationalist territory. So we just don't do it. Bringing social security, into devolved powers. We could do so much with that. We can make better decisions and get better outcomes, but we just don't do it because if you went over that line as the governing party, then you'd just be too nationalistic. That's what nationalists do. So really we won't help the people we need to. We'll just hold here and we'll manage the decline. And it annoys me greatly. So crime and justice is another one. We can make so many good decisions, and we could police ourselves better. And I think if we had those powers, but we always stop short of it, stop calling for it because we can't do that because that's nationalist territory. That's bad. And this overarching thing that and you see it all the way through Welsh society where somehow we've been programmed to believe we're rubbish, that we can't do stuff. Every other country in the world would do it, but for some reason we can't. We need somebody else to do it. It's rubbish. It's rubbish, and it's not. For me, it's not a case. For me, it's a perfectly practical thing. Is this right? I want to prepare for it because I would rather have it on my terms, as in Welsh terms, than somebody else's. So if you think this through logically, it might not be about what Wales does. It'll be about what Scotland does. Because the Scottish people, on every election, return a party to power that absolutely tells them, if you return us to power, we will pledge for independence. And if polls are to be believed in Scotland now, they will return that party in an ever increasing majority. So rather than sort of shun away from it, they're actually quite for it. And there's a lot of complicated reasons for it. But as far as we're concerned, we can't control it. It's out of our control, that is. Whatever you think of that party, whatever you think of their leader, whatever you think of that situation, whether you want them to go or not, it's kind of irrelevant because that's their choice, not ours. It's not up to us what another country wants to do. So if they decide to go, the United Kingdom's gone anyway. So then the question is for us, well, what do we do? When I joined Plaid in 2015, Welsh independence was at like 6%. So 39% now. That's a 5-year gap. Something's, people are starting to think in terms of, well, actually, what are we going to do? So if Scotland goes, what are we going to do? Because it is a massive thing when the blue comes off that flag. Massive.
I want to go back to local government.
Yeah, sure.
For a bit, and I want to go to COVID-19. It's something that we touched upon earlier, like you saying about grants.
Mm-hmm.
But I was wondering if you could just expand on the importance of the role that local government plays in tackling crises like the COVID-19 pandemic. Well,
they're the closest form of government to people, and they administer a lot of things that we take for granted. So when anything big happens like this, quite often it's not the national government that steers things, it's the local government that steers things. So, I've got, Caerphilly Council has had its detractors over the years, and rightly so, because it's made a lot of bad decisions. And the people are right to call them out on it. But I think in the case of COVID, they've done the best they could with what they've got, there'd have been a few improvements that could be made, when those grants were being processed first time rounds. It happened over bank holiday weekends. So, they scrambled and everyone in that council worked really hard to get those grants out. But actually, and there's a certain amount of Monday morning quarterbacking here because there's a lot of woulda, shoulda, coulda. But I think in the end, they've done possibly the best job they could do given the situation that they're in relation to COVID, at least. You know, I've got my arguments with them on a variety of other things, but you know, green spaces, leisure, the pay scandal, you know, the list is endless. But yeah, I think in this case, you know, those people who work for that council, you know, have done probably the best job that they could have done in the circumstances.
It is, of course, unprecedented.
Yeah.
In modern history, I haven't seen anything like this in more than a century. So, I mean, I'm not going to always give the government at any level the benefit of the doubt. You know, there have been failings.
Yeah.
I'm certainly lukewarm, to put it nicely, Boris Johnson and Mark Drakeford.
Yeah, well, listen, you know, I'll tell you what an old stage employee company told me once, and I'll take you with me all the way through however politics is going to go for me, right? So it's never pay attention to what a politician tells you. Always look at what they do, because that's what matters. So whenever a politician enters the fray and makes a statement or an intervention, always ask yourself, why have they done that? So why have they done what they've done? So is what they've done delivered a better outcome, or is that to boost their own profile, or is it to take us on a path to another issue? Always ask why. And 8 times out of 10, it's done because of other reasons than getting whatever issue it is over the line. And it's something that irks me. It really drives me around the bend sometimes.
It's why politicians like Boris Johnson do so well.
Yes.
Because they, and mentioned Tony Blair earlier.
Yeah.
It's why they do so well in elections, because say what you like about either of them, I mean, they both got charisma. They both got media appeal.
Yeah, sure.
And people like slogans. People tend to like slogans more than they like
policy.
Well,
it's populism, is what it is. I mean, we've just gone through a period of time where the people of this country have voted in bloc for a man and a party in Farage that is made a living out of saying, effectively, all of your ills, all of your, that job you couldn't get, that house you couldn't afford to buy, all of that, well, that can be sorted out if we just got rid of them over there. There's always a them. There's I remember growing up in, when I was young, 1990s, it was single mothers, and in the 80s it was men with AIDS and people from Ireland because of the troubles in that part of the world. Now we've got European Union and people of another faith and another gender and all of those things, right? So there's always a them. There's always a them you can blame. But people like that are charlatans. They're not interested in you. They're not interested in helping you in any way. What they're interested in is themselves. But you're right. They tend to do well. But the heartening thing is they tend to do well up until they have to make decisions, because populism will always be popular until it has to make decisions. You can be against everything and pretend you're on everybody's side. But in the end, at some point, you're going to have to tell us what you're for. And it's usually at that point, the house of cards collapses. Because then you have to stand on your morals, right? And you have to say, well, this is what I would do in that situation. And if you can't, or if what you have to offer is actually really paper thin.
And it's the problem with Boris Johnson, for example. He has no morals.
No.
It was the problem with Donald Trump. He had no morals beyond this need for self gratification.
Yeah, but so, I think all of this, a lot of this centre right wing populism we've seen sort of grow throughout sort of the Western world. That's not them doing well. That's people on our side, right? Count you in this as a sort of centre left, perhaps. That's people on our side. That is an absolute failure of people on our side to put our case forward in language that people understand. You know, that's on us. That's not them. You know, they've just taken advantage. You know, that's an absolute failure by us.
Messaging is obviously important. I mean, it's like, for example, so certain policies proposed by a certain politician,
Yeah,
say, for example, may enjoy widespread support along party lines.
yeah,
But you ask the same group of people, what do you think about that politician? They're very unpopular.
yeah. Look, I give you a good example of what you've just said. Right? So in the last term of the Senedd, the leader of the Conservative group put forward quite a good policy called the Autism Act, right? So, and it wasn't perfect, but it was a good base to start from, you know, and people whose families, who have members on that spectrum in their families, they would have benefited from that bill. Wasn't perfect. We would have had to go back to it. We'd have had to amend it, right? But the government voted that down. I'm still convinced to this day that the only reason they voted it down was because it came from a Conservative. You know, so when you do things like that, it is little wonder that people don't trust you. You know, it's politics at its worst. You know, and that's what we have to leave behind. Because if we don't leave it behind, you know, these people like Farage and Boris and, you know, Trump in America, they will continue to take advantage because they'll point at things like that where a normal member of the public will look at it and say, well, why did you do that? And they will look at it and think, well, this is all a game to you lot. You know, you just, and that's how these people have made a living off those kind of things, you know. So it's a, you know, where I've mentioned before, you know, normal people have to get involved in politics, otherwise we're going to continue to have these problems. You know, I really do mean it. You know, it's a concrete example of, you know, not that I have any truck with the Conservatives. Like, you know, I don't, you know, we don't see eye to eye on probably most things, but in that particular case, you know, that law wasn't, that sort of bill was not perfect, could have been worked on, but you know, they just voted it down because of where it came from, and that's nonsense.
But before I let you go, just to bring it all the way back to local, because as you've articulated at length about what you want for Wales.
Yeah.
But for the valleys, what are your hopes for the valleys going forward?
Well, the valleys of, I've probably mentioned before, we've been tricked into thinking we're rubbish, right? And that's not the case at all. You see, now I see, you know, fantastic things happening at a local level every day, right? I see, you know what's happening down at the, you know, down in Crumlin now with the navigation, right? There's been a group trying to get that off the ground for a very long time, you know, fantastic stuff. You know, I see people, you know, going out of their way to help other people. You know, I see people, you know, with cooperative businesses trying to help people back in society when they've been to prison, not because it's an easy thing to do, but because it's something they want to do. You know, and when you see things like that, you realize that the best resource we have is actually the people who live here, because they are fantastic and they are resourceful and they are bright and they are energetic. And all they really need is a government that will give them the tools to do the job that they're already doing better. And that means, you know, businesses being able to sort of get together and procure massive contracts that they can't do at the moment because, you know, they're not big enough. So, you know, increasing, you know, public procurement in our neck of the woods alone would create a couple of thousand jobs. You know, the money's already there. We already spend it. So why are we buying stuff from far away when there's a company down the road that makes it? You know, it's all of those kind of things. And what it takes, I think, is just common sense, sort of real world approaches to what should be problems that are easy to overcome. So, and it needs somebody to take that on as a challenge. And at the moment, I think what we're having, if I were to be sort of really critical, is a managed decline. And we shouldn't be doing a managed decline. We should be on the front foot in every aspect, and that's what I want to do. In the end, there are people here already doing good things. Politics is easy, right? Or should be easy. You just go and find the person in your community doing good things and you go and help them. And when they struggle, you stick around and help them some more. That's it. It shouldn't, it's not a difficult thing to do, and it's something that I've tried to do in the couple of years I've been in it. And it's something that I'll keep doing, whatever happens during this election. So, the biggest resource we have is our people, because they're brilliant and they're being held back at the moment and forced into mediocrity. And it's not good enough. And that has to change.
Councillor, thank you so much for being here.
It's a pleasure.
It's fascinating conversation. Wish you all the best going forward. The election for the Senedd is on May the 6th. Please go out and vote. When you do vote, wear a mask. Councillor Rhys Mills, everybody. Join us next time from Why Is This a Podcast? My name's Kieran Mott. See you then.